like an EU TARDIS, and we are time travelers. A year ago, the British people voted. They voted on this referendum on the EU, wanted, are we going to leave, are we going to stay in the EU? And, how did you feel when you heard about the result? I know I felt, but I don't know, how do you feel?
Well, I had campaigned against Brexit, so I must say I wasn't surprised, because I had talked with a lot of people who had been brainwashed by the tabloids and had extremely inaccurate views of the EU, and also of the way EU citizens were behaving in this country. They also were very confused about the difference between migrants, about refugees, about EU citizens. People had no idea or understanding of what the EU was. They didn't realize that we are all citizens of the EU, that we are at home everywhere in the EU, and that we have equal rights. I mean, they just couldn't see that if you were not British, you were foreigners. And I also met amazing Brits who were fighting for Europe, fighting for a very open vision of Britain, the Britain that I fell in love with, and that I know all of us did. Open-minded, tolerant, unusually so, a country that really was shining in Europe for a lot of people, a lot of young people, and it attracted a lot of young, bright people who wanted to be free and explore and be creative and try, to create companies or etc. etc. And I cried. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I went to bed, and I was in tears because I knew we had lost. And I thought, what on earth is going to happen? I had seen so much hatred. Joe Cox had been murdered, and I was very, very scared. That was my experience.
Yes, I wasn't surprised either of the result, I have to say. I followed the campaign, and I witnessed the change in narratives of the newspapers. They started, talking about us as EU migrants, and the word in itself has nothing wrong, but it's the wrong word, because the EU talks about free circulation of citizens, and we are citizens because we can vote in local elections. And I noticed, the term was used in a derogatory way. And also, when I read the comments underneath the papers, I started, noticing that, the tide was turning against us. So it did not surprise me at all. It took a while to sink in. The reality, I felt I was almost living in a surreal, like in limbo. But there was a surreal atmosphere of the day, and the sense of mourning for something that I almost had already lost. The other thought that came to my mind was the sadness to see a country like Britain with such a strong liberal tradition to abdicate, almost to that, because Britain has been the home of so many refugees. It's always been a very tolerant and welcoming place. So to see that was, there was a sense of great sadness. Yes.
I'd say I suppose half of me was I heard all of that and I saw the change in narrative, but I was still I think when I woke up on that morning in total disbelief. I just it was like your worst nightmares come true. It was like this is a sentence I keep saying, it's it was like somebody had pulled the rug from under 30 years of my life. So it takes away all your bearings, everything everything you take for granted, including how you relate to other people, to this, and also to this Britain that I've known and that's been my home for 30 years. How do you now fit into this new landscape, which nobody really knows what it means, how it's defined, and it's still not defined to this day. A year on. We know the negotiations have started. We don't know how that's going to go. I don't know, really. I was totally shattered. I was wailing. I wasn't crying, I was wailing. I felt really suicidal. It was it was catastrophic. I just could not believe what was happening. You know, when I say your worst nightmares come true, you keep waiting to wake up from it, and you just can't wake up from it, and it goes on week after week, and now months after months, and now it's been a year on, and the actual negotiations are starting, as I said, and we don't know, is this the beginning of the end of the nightmare, or is anything worse still to come? I don't know.
Yeah, I think the divisiveness for me is really, really difficult. That the fact that you look at friends, acquaintances, family members, did you vote Remain or did you vote Leave? I've never had that. It gives me an idea of what it might be to be a religious minority, or to have beliefs that aren't approved of by the majority of society. So I found that divisiveness very hard, or that people would either say, oh, but we don't mean you, which I found equally horrendous. I kept thinking, don't you realise what you've just said? You've just said we don't mean you. Well, you mean either all of us or none of us. So it's made me very angry as well. It's made me very angry, and it's the lens through which I look at everything now in Britain that comes my way. And of course that is hugely stressful. I think the energy we expend and the emotions we expend on a daily basis, and the toll it's taken on family and on people who say, well, why are you so worried? You won't get deported. And this understanding that a lot of people just do not have this emotional understanding of how I feel, that's been very, very difficult for me.
So after the referendum, I think there was this unison of worry among citizens, and I felt it too. I felt like someone died, and then we realized that it was actually a difficult place to live if you had the wrong status. And I think that was important, because until then we were enjoying a freedom movement, so we had every right to live here. We could vote, we obviously paid our taxes, and we enjoyed lots of rights. And then all these rights seemed that they could go away, and that's not something that I was ready for, because I didn't realize that before the referendum. Maybe I didn't want to think about it, but it suddenly became very complex, and the debate or the problems of citizens not getting their permanent residence, for example, struggling with the Home Office, that was new. That was definitely new to a lot of people. I know that in this room we've got people that know a lot about that process, either through research or through personal experience. So I like to dedicate 5-10 minutes to talk about this, because I think that permanent residence is actually quite central to the worries that people have. The uncertainty that we have about our future is based on the fact that we haven't got a legal status to base our future on, and it almost takes us to the category of the immigrants that will have arrived in the country without paper, and then suddenly how do you live? Well, that's different for us, because we had papers and we could not have papers in the future. Maybe I'm going to start with you. You've done lots of research on the subject, so you know a lot about the process, but you got very good personal experience on this too.
I was going to pick up on what you've just said, actually. You said, I didn't want to think about it. I don't think it's a case of I didn't want to think about it. It's more of a case of I didn't have to think about it. You know, if you've lived here for 5 years, you've acquired the right to permanent residence de facto. The problem is that with the vote has changed everything, because now we feel under obligation to have to prove the right to stay here, but not just to stay here, because we have, what the House of Lords has called indivisible rights, which means that from the right to stay, you have the right to work, you have the right to access education, start a business, access to healthcare, you name it. You have the right to access all kinds of services, etc. Just like any other British person. The only difference between myself and a British person at the moment, pretty much, is a passport, is acquiring the citizenship. Otherwise, I have access to pretty much everything on par with what British citizens have access to. So this means that a lot of people have suddenly thought, well, I need to do something about the fact that I have to prove my right to be here, so I have got to acquire this. Some people are talking about a car, some people are talking about a certificate. What is this all about? And they are discovering a nightmarish process. And yes, it's fair enough to say it is a nightmare of a process, and there's consensus on that. Nobody disagrees that the process of applying for permanent residence is unheard of in the rest of the EU. We did a quick scoping exercise which showed that the UK was totally unique in the amount of information it requires, in the demands that it makes, in the length and complexity of the process, and also it has included a couple of requirements which are effectively contra EU legislation, which means that a lot of people currently do not meet the permanent residence entitlement criteria, which means that basically it raises the question of what happens then. If you can't obtain that card, then what happens to you? Will they be allowed to stay? Will they not be allowed to stay? Does that mean that some families are going to be broken up because one partner is allowed to stay but the other one isn't, by virtue of being British or being EU or being non-EU? Because non-EU people also derive their rights from being a partner, usually a spouse of an EU citizen. So that raises a lot of questions for adults, but also for children. You know, that process is incredibly difficult and not at all designed for children, you know, who are asked to prove their right of residency. So it's easier if mum or dad is British, but if neither of them is British, and it becomes a lot more complicated because the form anyway and the process isn't designed for children. So there are lots of issues like this, and yes, I have done some research which is solely focused at that process of trying to acquire permanent residency. But a lot of the people who responded, it was quite a large sample of 2,800 people, about 2/3 of them have decided not to apply because of fear of rejection, because they know already or they've found out that they do not meet the requirements of the process, or because they don't want to come under the radar of the British government, precisely because they know they won't meet those criteria. So they are worried, you know, what if kind of scenario. And so they're really worried about the consequences of not getting the card. There's a lot of those who have decided to apply is broadly for two reasons. The first one is the need for certainty. And the need of certainty is through getting the card or through, once they've got the card, applying for British citizenship. You know, there's a lot at stake in people's lives. A lot of these people have been in the UK for a long time. They're settled. They bought the whole package that a lot of people do. You know, they get the job, the career, they get married, they buy the house, the mortgage, the kids, the lot, which is what, you know, a lot of ordinary life is made of. So they want to be able to stay. And a lot of people have got nowhere to go back to. You know, home is here. So that's been really endangered through not being able to acquire residency in one form or another. And it's nearly 2 million people who are potentially in that bracket of people who either can't get PR or probably wouldn't get it. And you know, the process is designed for very linear situations, but life isn't linear. Life is complex. Life circumstances change as well, and the process isn't designed for this. It's very, you know, from A to Z, and it's very rigid. It's not at all flexible. It doesn't cater for all these situations, and you know, you feel you're being processed by some kind of robotic system that has to tick a box, and if you do not fit into the box, then you're out of the box.
So nothing to do with the person who set up all these processes. It might be a bit robotic too.
Well, it might be. We don't know. The point is that this particular system was never ever designed for the situation that we have now, whereby, as I said, nearly 2 million people potentially have to go through the process to acquire permanent residency. We don't know, anyway, what's going to happen post-Brexit to the current process. So that's why with the 3 million we're working towards getting a simplified, human size, flexible, swift, fast, easy, preferably free process, which would also encourage, if it was free, would also encourage a lot of people to apply, because it's not just the £65 you have to pay, it's also the cost of putting together the documentation, which is enormous. And anybody who doesn't have a linear situation really needs the services of an immigration lawyer. And if you're in London, prices we've heard range around between 1,500 and £3,000. Outside of London, it's on average about £1,000–1,200 for a lawyer to put you through the process, with obviously no guarantee of success. So not everybody's got this sort of money. So as you can see, it's a long and complex process.
Okay.
Can I add? I'd like to add something to that. This process, I've naively been waiting for a sign of government, because they've had a year, to kind of simplify this process, because that's an obvious thing to do. It's a pragmatic thing from the British side, because they need to register potentially 3 million people. So I've been looking for the debates around this, some open, neutral debates, and that brings me to another thing we haven't quite mentioned, why also we are more alarmed perhaps than some of our British counterparts on the continent. And it's this hostile environment from the government that for me started at the Tory party conference when there was talk of lists of foreigners and we will tolerate you until we've grown our own talent. And that really hurt. That hurt very, very much, because the British abroad have some very serious concerns about pensions and other issues, but I don't think they've met with such hostile reception by their respective governments. And this is a real burden, and is something I don't understand, because obviously from a pragmatic point of view it makes every sense to quickly change the system of registering people, bring it in line with EU. There's nothing really particularly controversial around that, but the fact that that wasn't tackled makes me really feel that there's been this environment that was created to make us all feel in limbo and to make those of us leave who can't bear it.
And people have left.
Yes.
People have already left. I mean, we've seen that with the people that took part in our book of testimonies. A lot of people have already left or are preparing to leave. A lot of them are top people. This country supposedly wants to attract the youngest and brightest, the best and brightest, and the best and brightest are leaving in droves. Also, people stop applying for places at universities here, or nurses to come and work for the NHS, and the NHS is in bad need of recruiting staff from the EU, from abroad. And again, people are starting to realize Britain is no longer that wonderful place that was so open and where you could build your life and feel at home.
There are, especially I think among scientists and academia in general, many people are ready to leave or have left because in some cases they haven't, as Anna-Laure was saying, the criteria to obtain permanent residency are quite stringent, and if you fall out, for instance, it's typical of academics to be out of the country more days than they are supposed to for to obtain permanent residency, or in some cases to improve their career, they move outside of Britain for a couple of years, or they take a sabbatical. So of course they then they weren't ready for this, and now they don't seem to meet the criteria required to have this a piece of paper. And many of them are leaving. Many are saying, as I was saying, have left. For instance, there's an example, with regards to permanent residency of this doctor she speaks in she tells a story in the book, who has discovered a cure for a disease, and yet she's been treated, by the Home Office with contempt, and she has not, been able to qualify for permanent residency, which is absolutely, incomprehensible, and like her, many. So I think that's probably one of the fields where more people are beginning and thinking of leaving nurses as well. But picking on what going back to what Nicola and Annela were saying, there has been really a before and after the referendum. To me, before people here felt settled, I felt settled, certainly. I felt integrated. I felt I was part. I never wondered where home was. I mean, I happened to be born in Italy, but I could have been born in another part of Europe. And this was home for me. And after that, our lives have been thrown in this, incredible uncertainty. And I'm one of the lucky ones who doesn't have, a particularly complicated, situation. But I've listened in chat rooms to people who are truly desperate. I mean, there's, when people say, oh, this is over, you're over exaggerating, they should be listening to people whose life have been thrown in complete disarray, mothers of, disabled children, people who have situation of great fragility. And they are the ones, I suspect, if things are not changed, they're going to pay the highest price. And this is, so wrong. And I hope things are, and that's why we have to continue this fight.
Definitely.
Because when even I hear that we're going to receive a generous offer, I don't understand where the generosity is when you take away something that we already have and then give it back in some form, because we still don't know which form, it will take. So where's the generosity in all that? It's keeping people in this uncertainty. For some is difficult, for others is unbearable. And it's not a joke at all. We're talking about people's lives.
Yeah, and there's something else that people are very confused about in this country. People say, oh, you're married to a Brit, you'll be fine. I've been married to a Brit for 27 years. I've been here for 30 years. I have a PhD in literature from a university in Britain, and I cannot have PR because I was self-sufficient for a long time, because I'm a writer, so I spend a lot of time doing my writing, and I was published in France, and when I was published in France I paid tax in France. It was the way my publisher, it was the way it happened. I had loads of little jobs here over the years, but apparently they don't count. And therefore I had no idea, being self-sufficient, that I needed a comprehensive health insurance. Because nobody had ever told me that. I had no idea. I mean, I asked my GP, whom I've known for 20 years, and she had no idea about it. I worked for universities, they had no idea about it. Hospitals have no idea about it. The consulate has never ever told me about it. So I found myself realizing that I can't get PR because of something I never knew about. And also, because my husband is English, he cannot sponsor me. Elena has been self-sufficient as well, but her husband is European, therefore he's covered by European law. He is exercising treaty rights in Britain, and therefore he can sponsor his wife, and they, their family is seen as a unit, and Elena can get PR and citizenship. I can't.
Yes.
I can't. And if I can't stay here, my husband, not being an EU citizen anymore, cannot come with me, which means that we got married here. The state, we got married in this country at a registry office. We were told that our union shouldn't be vulnerable to anybody. Nobody can put asunder what this union is about. And the British state is trying to destroy my marriage, and they have done it already to thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of non-EU British families, because the non-EU citizens are not covered by the EU, and because we were protected by the EU, we were fine. We were at home here, but after Brexit, we could be treated exactly the same as the non-EU citizens. They are called Skype families. Very few people know it. They are people who live separate lives. Children who never see one of their parents apart from on Skype. That is absolutely immoral. It's completely mad. And you look at other European countries, and you realize they value families, at least. Not Britain.
And as a matter of fact, many people still don't believe that such children, I was trying to explain to my mother who lives in Italy, and others I heard in France were trying to explain that non-Europeans are treated this way, that you have to earn, above a certain threshold and everything, and that's what many Europeans now feel, fear that may happen to them. And it's something that doesn't really sink in because, you're treated as a unit.
It's been a year now. The political landscape has changed dramatically. Yeah, but our situation hasn't. Do you have any examples of people that really struggle with the Home Office? Because I think what strikes me here is that if the Home Office had been willing to make us feel welcome, make sure that the rules would change, we would be in a different situation now.
Totally.
Absolutely.
Well, you could talk about your situation. I mean, Elena started this group because of her situation.
Well, in a way, prompted me. It was something, but that has to do not with PR, but with citizenship. Because after we went through all the process of PR, which is not easy even when it's linear, because my husband had, a job and, for 5 years he met the criteria. Even then, you have to find documents of my son's child benefit, and he's now 20. So luckily, my husband keeps everything. So we could, we had to send these 5 kilos. And yet, although he's very good at that, he made a couple of mistakes in the form to say how, complicated it is. After that, I had my PR, I'd done all my tests, everything was, seemed to be at last ready for citizenship. I went to the National Checking Service and I was sent home because they told me, oh, yes, you have everything, but how can you prove that you've been living here for 5 years? And I said, I don't know, I have my PR, I have, and the test of English as a, well, I didn't have to do that because but, everything, and said, oh, because you have I said, I've listed all my flights in and out of the country for 5 years. And they said, yes, but you have no stamps. And they said, well, that's not my problem, if you don't do it because we are, in Europe. And so I was sent home and I was told that I had to prove that I had been living here for 5 years through trying to send doctors showing that I was, going to the doctor, that I had to send 5 years of bank statements. They said, have you got a joint account? And I said, no. Oh, good. So you can prove, that, you've spent the money. So talking about privacy, I had to send all my medical, exams to prove that I have been to the doctor, all my bank statements, so they know what I eat, where I buy things, and again another 5 kilo of. And I asked people as well to let it wasn't it was recommended, it was not necessary, but letters of recommendation saying they saw me, coming outside of the door, and that I went to church every Sunday, things like these, just to say that I lived here, because how. Well, if you don't work, how do you prove that you lived in a place? So that was, bureaucratic, again, nightmare. But again, that was for citizenship. And what many people don't realize as well in Britain is that citizenship, first of all, is very expensive, incredibly expensive. For a family of 3, I mean, you're talking about roughly £1,500 each. So it's not a joke. And other countries don't allow dual nationality. So even when people now are searching for documents, because we don't know whether this PR will be enough, who knows what's, if it's going to change, it's not that citizenship is available to everybody because of cost and because of the way, other countries, have rules and everything. So, but of course we heard of many people trying to apply for PR, as I was saying, many academics being turned down by the Home Office because it's not in our stories, but I remember one economist who sent all the documents, and she wrote a 4 that looked like a 9 or something like that, and they sent everything back. So silly things like that, you know, would be enough to to send everything back and ask you to reapply. So as I was saying, so many people had, to face this bureaucratic nightmare, even in terms of payments. They were told, you never know what's behind it, but we weren't able to take your payment, once and twice,
Yes.
and we heard it so many times that you wonder whether it's incompetence or whether there's no desire in a way to make things easy for you.
Yeah.
So
we've really wondered, reading so many stories. We really
bureaucratic nightmare, I think, is well documented, and it's been very difficult. But Brexit was a political issue.
Yes.
It was a campaign led by Eurosceptic for 20, 30 years, which ultimately was successful.
Yes.
So that political issue can be solved through political means.
Mm.
What was your reactions? Do you feel very well treated or not by the politicians in this country? What do you think?
No, not at all. Personally, not at all. No, I mean, there's been a couple of parties, i.e. the Lib Dems and the Greens, who have talked about us, who have endorsed, fighting against Brexit, i.e. speaking for half of the country that was against it. And then the rest, it's been the worst, of course, the Conservatives and the government above all, because there have been some really good Conservative lords and MPs who have shown real humanity and concerns. That's the thing, it's more on a human level, on an individual level. It's the same with some Labour. I mean, there is a Labour MP for Bristol whom I've met, and she is absolutely wonderful, and I chatted with her loads, and she was so supportive of us. And a Labour, she's the Labour MEP that I met in Bristol as well. Absolutely wonderful, supportive. Again, people who know about our situation, people who care, people who really want to do something. But otherwise, we've been really ignored. I don't know if you feel that.
Yeah,
we've been so ignored because we can't vote in the general elections. It's as if we don't count.
Or worse than that, we've been treated like a commodity.
Completely.
I have in various official documents seen the word stock, high volume and low volume labour. I am absolutely horrified by this. When we appeared at the Brexit Select Committee hearing, people asked us outright, why are you here? And I was astonished to have been asked that. And they expected the answer would be for economic purposes.
Yes.
And that speaks to your point. They've lumped everything together, refugees, benefits. We have been mutually claimed too many benefits or taken too many jobs, but it's on a purely economic level that this debate is being conducted, even amongst the Labour, in the kind of official Labour rhetoric. It is all about jobs for the British, and that is a frightening level of nationalism, and also of turning us into others. Who, for each of us, we've done some research amongst our constituents. There are about 3 Brits who can vote, directly concerned, whether they're partners, children, close relatives, people we care for. So it's actually very odd that they've ignored us so much, because we are tied in with British society. So for every European, there are probably 3 British voters who have cast their votes clearly recently.
And we have so much contributed to the economy. I mean, all of us have worked, paid tax.
Or volunteered. This brings me to a completely other dimension, that there's this fear of being second and third class citizens. So someone may have worked here and paid taxes all their lives. Are they any better than someone who came as a carer or a housewife, as someone who's given... We have a lady who had cancer, and out of gratitude for the NHS, she's now a volunteer. She's a cancer volunteer. She does not qualify for permanent residence. Yeah. She has given years to other cancer patients.
I agree totally with you. And we spend our life justifying ourselves. We feel we have to just... I was talking with lovely Ariane. We were having a chat for Italian television at Elena's. Yes. and this other EU citizen came, and we started talking about ourselves, and she turned to me and she said, Veronique, have you realized you've just been trying to justify that you never use benefits, that you know that you don't cost the country that you've contributed. She said, who cares? You're at home here. You were allowed to be here. You know, you are a citizen in Europe at home. And you know, when she said that, I felt this sense of relief and this sense of, oh my God, you're so right. I feel I'm not allowed to breathe the air anymore because, yeah.
I think actually it's quite indicative of a wider problem in the UK. This rhetoric between active and inactive citizens, productive and non-productive citizens, isn't just linked to Brexit and EU citizens and migrants and migration. It's there underlying text all the time. So if you're not bringing back money to the economy and to the state, you are not worth the paper that your passport's written on.
So
and it's it's a very damaging kind of rhetoric, because people, as you said, bring so much more to society than just taxes. And even people who don't work, they do bring taxes in the form of VAT back to the system. Students, stay-at-home mums and dads, they do go out and do shopping, and they do spend money that goes back into the economy. But this thing about it gives Britain a bad press, because it kind of justified what Napoleon said, all of these years ago, 200 years ago nearly, that Britain is a nation of shopkeepers.
Yes, we were saying.
And that Britain is so much more and so much better than this. So it's I'd like that Britain to wake up and find its openness and welcoming, which we've all enjoyed, back, because this was one of the reasons why I moved here. It was an open society. Yes. You could do stuff which I couldn't do back in really stifled France.
Yes.
And it was a different approach. It was much more pragmatic in some ways, infuriating in other ways, but you could do stuff. And this is gone. But so now we're kind of all being reduced here as little entities, individual entities who are either productive or not productive, active, not active.
Yes.
And we're all people who bring all kinds of things to it.
Yes.
But I think it's the utilitarian mentality,
yes,
which is really risky, because that's what has reduced us to bargaining chips. That famous Tory conference. Good bargaining capital. When I heard these words, I think even more probably than on the day of the referendum, I felt so hurt. I never had been that hurt in my life, when you're reduced to a mere commodity. And of course then, if you give a lot back, fine. Otherwise, if you become ill, if you have, but also we have to think, talking about people who take care of others and but do not count, of the, so many European citizens who are carers for British in-laws, for instance, and now they don't qualify for PR. Or I think of, a story in the book of that Italian couple who out of generosity adopted a British kid, and now they do not qualify for PR because the husband is doesn't earn enough, and yet they have never to claim benefits, and probably they're very self-sufficient, but they don't meet the criteria. And
but even if you do claim benefits, it's been research.
Oh yes, I agree.
It's been research that shows that for every £1 that's spent on welfare benefits on a migrant, which is a terrible word.
Yes.
We're citizens. Yeah. Then I think it's a £1.3 that comes back, or if not more. So these are really false arguments and really dangerous arguments. And I think it was even worse than that at the Common Select Committee. This particular member of the committee asked me, he said, so why do you think people come to Britain? Is it for work or is it for benefits? It was really, really, and it's all filmed, so it's all available.
And Nicola, you had a brilliant answer about the medicine. You said, if you want, that was lovely, the way you did it. If you need a really good medical, treatment, I advise you go to France. And it's true.
Well, there is a story of Natalie.
Yes.
she suffers, she
Yeah.
has, serious health problem, and because of Brexit, she will not be able to have French NHS any longer. So she's decided now her husband will remain here. They're selling the house. They are basically splitting the family because the husband doesn't speak French, and she's taking the kids with her because she cannot. She relies so much on the French NHS, and even that is something which is going to cease. When we are,
Yes.
eventually we exit from the European Union. So there are so many implications.
And also she's suffering from depression, which is making her illness worse because of
Absolutely.
the uncertainty.
Yeah.
Just going back to the idea of the nightmare,
Mm.
we all felt the same. I think that's something that is quite interesting, is that when we are all very different people, the great majority came out of love, or if it wasn't love, they fell in love with this country. So it's a massive love story. We are like, when parents adopt a child and they say, parents who have children, they don't choose them, but we adopted you, we chose you, and we love you particularly. Well, that's us. We were not born here, but we chose Britain because we fell in love, and it was very often a love that came from childhood. It's something incomprehensible, something really extraordinary. And now we are sort of betrayed, and we are slapped in the face by the object of this immense love. And we are grieving, and that's what we've noticed, is that we are all so different, but we have exactly the same words that we use to describe what we're going through.
Yes.
We have the same expressions. It's extraordinary how we never communicated much between all of us Europeans because we were so integrated that we didn't feel the need of knowing. I didn't know it. French people, I didn't have the need. My friends were my friends. They were Brits, because I lived in Britain, but now, if anything, the extraordinary thing for me, and I think for a lot of us, for all of us here anyway, is that we've met all these Europeans and realized that they are all people who had a spirit of adventure. That's why they dared to leave their homes. It takes a form of courage, and it takes imagination to dare to leave behind the familiar and try to start from scratch, because you are a nobody, you are a foreigner. You start at the very bottom, but it's extraordinarily freeing as well. And I think we all have felt this joy at reinventing ourselves, at being truly ourselves. And now what we're experiencing is we're living in a dystopia. It's a nightmare. We are going to wake up one day, but we never wake up. It's one day, it's 1 week, it's exactly what Anne-Laure was saying, and months, and now a year, and we still don't see any end in sight, and it's a torture.
It is a torture, and the prevalent feeling is that of betrayal. We had a professor of philosophy who's one of our moderators in the group, and she's she asked more than 1,000 people which was the prevalent feeling, and betrayal came out as the
EU citizens.
EU citizens came out as the strongest feeling people experienced. I think betrayal always means that there was a love before. You feel betrayed if you've loved somebody. And I think that's probably how we feel. We love this country, and taking in the image Veronique was using, I feel like as if Britain has adopted me, and like an adopted child, you become a child, like everybody else, and all of a sudden I feel rejected, and so I don't quite know where I'm standing. Where is home?
Yes.
Where is home now after so many years abroad?
What do you think? I'm going to ask all of you actually, if you answer that. What do you think is going to be our future? It's been a year now, so we know how we feel, and it's not a nice place. What's your fear? What's your hope for the future? Maybe I'm going to start with you.
I really don't know. I really, really do not know, because I don't even know if I can get PR, and I can't afford the services of an immigration lawyer, so I'm kind of stuck already there. I don't know. I have nowhere to go back to, you know, my only remaining family are my friends, and they're all mostly here. I don't know. I know I don't sound very positive. That's because I don't feel positive at all. Every week that passes, there's some more kind of rumours or bad news. There's, you know, either it comes from media, or as you've heard some horrible story from somebody. I'm not saying that these stories shouldn't go out at all. Actually, no, they need to go out as much as possible, hence the book. But it's grinding. It's absolutely grinding. Maybe this is what they're hoping for. Maybe they're hoping that we'll be so, you know, that we'll lose our resistance and just give up and go. Maybe, I wouldn't be surprised if some of them in government or who voted leave, that's exactly what they're hoping, get rid of us. I really worry for all those who are really fragile, really vulnerable. As I said, you know, there's a lot of people who are feeling, it's more than vulnerable, they're feeling really suicidal, and they've got nowhere to turn because they're not going to get any help whatsoever from mental health services. And is that a solution? Should we grind people down to a level where they have to resort to mental health services just to survive? I don't think so. I think this nightmare has to stop. I think the right thing to happen is for, you know, first of all, our rights to be ring-fenced as soon as possible, so we can put some kind of a stop to the onslaught which we've experienced, and start thinking what that future could look like. At the moment, that's my only hope, you know, a bit of respite from this, all of this.
Yes, sorry. No, I very much agree with you. I still feel stuck in limbo, because this limbo is not only having, you know, when you have the right documents, then you're fine. It's a psychological, you know, thing as well, where you wonder really, you know, which, you know, where we're heading towards, what we, you know, what's going to happen in the future. Are we going to feel welcome here? That's again, you know, the other question. You know, living here maybe. Whereas before I felt completely integrated, now I wonder whether I'm tolerated. And, you know, when people ask me, where are you from? In the past, probably I wouldn't mind. Now I wonder, you know, do they want to know because they, you know, they're thinking something about me? And it's an awful place to be. And I worry, like Anne-Laure, for the most fragile, because they've been going through hell here. And in private chats, I've had, you know, various, you know, long chats with people who really were at the end of you know, their tolerance to the. So you know, it's you know, I will be positive only if I see a change in narrative. I think Britain has to discover compassion. I think, you know, until we go on treating people like means and not ends. I think, you know, philosophy should be taught in British schools, and the lesson of Kant of not using individuals, you know, as commodities, you know, should be really learned. Until that doesn't change, there's not going, in my opinion, there's not much room for hope. You know, maybe, who knows? I mean, things change every day, and you know, that there seem to be, British politics has never been more varied and more, so I'm hoping that, you know, people are at one point, you know, bound to you know, start thinking, you know, what do we want for the future? What do we want for the future of our children? Because lots of Brits also are married to other EU nationals, and these families are European families. You cannot divide them. You cannot divide this society, which is so intermingled, and and hence, you know, the book as well. You know, I hope it's for people maybe who voted Remain but a bit reluctantly, for people who were soft leavers, because there's some, in my opinion, who cannot maybe, you know, not, you know, we cannot redeem. I hope it touches their hearts and makes them you know, reflect on what kind of society, you know, they want to build, what kind of, you know, country does this want to become? I always felt as Anna-Laure, this was, the country where you could be whoever you wanted. There was, a country of freedom. And now I'm rethinking it. So
yeah, and I think you're talking about education, and I think education is extremely important. Yes, about compassion. I mean, when you hear politicians using low volume, it was low volume, high value, and high volume, low value, talking about us. I heard it used in the House of Commons, and I was in shock. And I thought, oh my God, we're cattle, or are we back to slavery?
Yes.
Is it that sort of landscape we're back in? And so there is compassion, but there is also a sense of analysis, learning that you cannot accept what you read in the papers, learning that you have to see who is telling you something, what is their motivation, what is this right-wing tabloid who keeps saying terrible things about foreigners or about Muslims or about, why, where do they come from, what's their agenda? Don't believe it, question it. And there is also a lot of rubbish on the internet, a lot of stuff that people believe. I saw that during the Brexit campaign. I couldn't believe what people believed was happening in France. There were demonstrations because of the labor laws passed by the government, and people were telling me it was because of Muslims in France, that France had been overtaken by Muslims and everybody was veiled from head to toes and the French were rebel. It was rubbish. And I kept telling them it's rubbish. They didn't believe me. They believed extreme right propaganda that is on the internet. Breitbart and extreme right groups that I knew of because I'd researched them for my personal work. So I knew all the names, and I said, this is not true, but people don't have this distance where they can judge. I wish people did judge.
Yeah. The school can teach,
and
give you the tools.
Exactly,
to
and
interpret
philosophy,
society.
as you said, teaching philosophy at school or whatever you call it, but just to tell people, okay, this is a text, does it sound true? Where does it come from? Just get into that habit. And Britain was very compassionate. Britain was a place of compassion, of
strong
trust.
tradition. Yes.
And we want Britain to regain that. It's not changing. It's becoming what it is deep down. It's these people that have taken over the narrative, the national narrative. Just put them back in their place and recapture what the true spirit of Britain is. Yes. And I think we see what's happening at the moment in the terrible tragedies that are shaking British society. We see that the result of this division, of this hatred, we are only a small part of the narrative.
Absolutely.
Of course, it's a massive part for us. It's all our lives are in disarray. But I think within Britain, we are one of the many symptoms that things is going extremely wrong, and that people have to come to their senses and regain, go back to what the spirit of Britain is.
And also what Churchill, as we were mentioning, said, that
Absolutely.
Every European, each one of us should be proud, hope one day to say, I'm European. And,
yes.
And each one of us may feel at home in each country in Europe, where we go to, and, refine what, he
wanted the United States of
yes.
Europe. And he said indeed that he would dream of every, anybody from any part of Europe being in any city of Europe, looking around and saying, I am at home. Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I keep saying that, this sense of history that I find some of my British friends don't have, and that's because we don't have the same history.
Yeah.
It's something I often say. I was born and brought up in Picardy, where in the space of 70 years we had 3 wars. Maternal granddad fought in World War I, World War II, and had a lot of respect for the German soldiers who came and they were caught up in this mess, especially in World War II. And when Europe came about, he was all for it. And when I was growing up and we were having these discussions in the 70s, actually, he could see that Europe was problematic in many ways, but what he kept saying is that we have to work with it, because it's not Europe, it's Project Europe.
Yes.
And
It is.
a project is a dynamic venture. It's something you need to work with, it's something you need to challenge, and it's something that's always in progress.
Yes.
And this is the only way we have to stay. I think Britain is making a huge mistake to leave. But I think we should work together, and if we haven't had any many major wars since World War II, it is because we've got Europe.
We've had 70 years of peace,
Yes.
which is an incredible achievement when you think, people concentrate on straight bananas and all that. If they started thinking, of what, this has meant, of course we can discuss then whether Europe, needs to be reformed and how and defining, but the fact remains that we've had 70 years of peace, and that's an amazing achievement. And one of the continents which has shed more blood than any other on wars.
It never stopped.
And you never know whether it may come back, because when you isolate yourself and you create barriers, it's not the time any longer. Yes, absolutely. There was a time for nations, and now there's a time to rediscover this common project, and and bring new strength, new vitality, and in a way perhaps us European, like living here, have had a bit of a taste of what it means now, and we've probably had even more time, painfully, but to reflect on this. I feel this year has made me more European, not that I always felt very much so. But
some of our British friends, that's my hope, if we talk about hopes, that I've never heard more pro-European talk in this country.
I agree.
And they're the seeds of something, and the question just is whether this country that's been taken hostage by the press, by hardcore Brexiteers, whether it can shake this, or whether it's Stockholm syndrome and they'll succumb and adopt the ideology of their captors. And that's something, as the mother of a child, I am watching, because I could just about swallow my own Europeanness for a while, but if I feel my child is growing up in a country that doesn't see the bigger picture and hasn't got European values, possibly lacks the citizenship education in his school, I think that's when I would have to consider. I would not leave England because the economy will tank, which I think it will. I'm not here for economic reasons. I would only leave if the ideology and culture of this country keep on this trajectory, but the optimist in me says it cannot last.
I feel the same.
yeah.
I still have faith.
Before we wrap up,
sorry.
I'd like you to speak about the book. So you've done this incredible collection of human stories, and if we think about it, there are 3 million stories.
Yes,
Yeah?
they are.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's a small sample
Absolutely. It's just a snapshot.
Exactly. So where did you get this idea from? And how do you do it? And what was the experience of talking to so many people?
Well, it started when I started joining after the referendum. I felt very isolated, and I started joining groups like the 3 Million, and I realized that people were leaving mini testimonies here and there, without realizing in their posts. And I noticed a lot of pain, a lot of, there were lots of feelings coming out. And I almost felt it was a pity not to collect them. They would have gone, my thought was they'll be dispersed, in the thousands, posts. So this idea came, of collecting them and putting them together to give a voice to these people. Because I felt if we put them all together, it will be a much stronger voice. And so I started a group, and I was almost immediately joined by Veronique, and I felt she could be a very good person to work with because of her enthusiasm. By Tim, British editor, and Anna-Laure came as well and gave us help, and by a group of very enthusiastic moderators, other people who felt very much the same. And the idea of the group was to create something, a small, group, to create an atmosphere that allowed people to open up, and to make them feel safe, so that they could share their stories, with us, like with friends. And I always said,
we became friends.
We have, of
you
course.
Friendship is really, really central in the group. I mean, not friendship,
Yes.
but the friendship with others as well.
Yes.
And it's become a support group very much. When one of us is feeling low, I mean, there is always a little, what can we do to help so and so, and then people sort of meet up, and it's really helped us.
Absolutely.
And I think the cocoon has allowed exactly what
people
you said,
to
Elena.
really
Yeah.
share their stories. It was incredible, the openness, they spoke about, they put their lives there, but they felt it was almost a cathartic, a cathartic experience, because sometimes you have so much, inside, and you feel this pain or this, worry or this fear, and the fact of writing it, putting it there, it really helped. And so, yes, this group has grown from strength to strength, I feel, and people have left their stories, but as Nicola says, each one of us, I think, can identify with at least,
Exactly.
one of them. I feel I can identify with probably tens, dozens of them, because there's always an element, and, you feel yes, and, I feel like that. And also, we've arranged them in a way that, to create a narrative, starting, we noticed that the prevalent feelings were those of sadness, of disappointment, of worry, of anger, and betrayal, which were the ones, the feelings that Helen de Cruz in her Wordle has, showed, people felt. And so the book starts, with these, feeling, and it grows and grows, and moves on, and to testimonies which, are probably a bit stronger, just to prepare the reader, for yes.
But we noticed as well that because it's grief, that was really interesting for us.
Complex.
We spent so much time talking about that, because at the same time, it's quite there were 5 categories and 5 parts, and then we realized that a lot of the testimonies could belong to several parts,
intermingled,
because grief is about, you have the 5 stages of grief, but they don't happen one after the other. They happen at the same time.
Yes.
And so we started getting more and more of a feel that a lot of testimonies were intermingled, etc. But then we still managed to really see a crescendo, and but that's the interesting thing, and I think that's why we feel so strongly about the book, that the book represents a lot more people than there are testimonies, because we realize that we all are using the same story, the same way, the same words, we all have the same emotions. We are so much living the same experience, and that's why the book is so important.